Nice.
All right, it is time to turn back to the UFC. It is Conor McGregor against Khabib Nurmagomedov on Saturday week in Vegas. And I'm delighted to welcome Ariel Helwani of ESPN now back to the show. Ariel, what's the crack?
You know, Owen, I must say, things are going so well that I was going to say the crack is 90. It's actually 91 over here. How about that?
Well, that's great to hear. I dare say the crack is 91 because there's a pretty big fight around the corner, and I'd say the hype is bubbling along nicely.
Yes, it's finally, it feels like there's a light at the end of this tunnel, that we're going to see Conor back. We're around 10 days away now. There hasn't been, a lot of media, a lot of interviews, but they sort of whet our appetite last Thursday in New York City with the press conference, which gave us a lot to digest, a lot to chew on. So I'm ready. I like the fact that from the moment it was announced up until the fight, it's essentially like a 2-month build. Of course, we've been waiting almost 2 years for Conor to return to MMA, but it feels like it all happened relatively quickly from the moment they announced it, and I like that. It didn't drag on. No,
that press conference has certainly been one of the most dissected, shall I say, press conferences in any sport I can remember over the past couple of years. Like Dana White obviously calling it one of the darkest things he's ever seen. I think a lot of people agreed with that sentiment from Dana White, that it wasn't so much what was said, it was the tone of what was said, it was the body language of McGregor, and that there was this deeper underlying thing here, that there is a real kind of dislike between these two fighters, that this isn't all for show, this isn't all to sell the fight.
Yeah, honestly, I don't really know what Dana White was talking about as far as it being the darkest. This is vintage Conor McGregor. This is why he is beloved. He doesn't just show up to press conferences unprepared and sits back and says, okay, the media is going to ask me questions now and I'm just going to respond. He comes prepared. Not only does he research his opponents as far as their fighting styles are concerned and their height and their reach, things of that nature, he researches their background. And not only does he research his opponent's background, he researches his opponent's team's background as well. So I never thought that at any point it got uncomfortable. Obviously, there was, there weren't any fans there, so it never felt like it was a hostile environment. I'm not sure why fans in Ireland felt that it was, ugly or uncomfortable or whatever you were alluding to. I expected this from Conor, and I expected what we saw from Khabib. Stoic, unflappable, not really fazed by it all. They kind of delivered what I think most people wanted to see, and I thought it was, like as though you look back at Conor before the Eddie Alvarez fight, he was loud, he was braggadocious, he was colorful, he was the same thing. I mean, this is no different. Sometimes he turns it up a little here and there, but this is what we've come to expect from Conor.
Yeah, that's very interesting. It's quite a measured take on it, because I think some people are even suggesting that the character of Conor McGregor had changed. They had noticed a shift in how he was performing, that maybe the previous Conor McGregor was, I don't know, he relied less on, dark things perhaps to actually put across his charisma, whereas he was maybe less charming last Thursday night, seems to have been a school of thought. I'm not sure if I'd agree with that myself. It depends what you kind of consider charming as well, I'd suppose, and it's all subjective. But I don't know, it seems that maybe you're right, that there isn't as much, we don't need to read into this as much as some people have been doing.
Look, I think the Irish people sometimes, and I don't obviously live in Ireland, I've only been there once, but I have friends who live there, and I work with Peter Carroll, or I used to work with him, and he tells me a lot about what goes on over there, and I think that sometimes the Irish people are too critical of Conor, and they want him to be a certain way. He is who he is, and I know that there's a certain sort of, standard, and you need to be a role model, but let's not forget, at the end of the day, all's fair in love and fight promotion, and Conor is going to adapt to whoever he is fighting. So if it, in his mind, requires to go certain places, he's going to go certain places. And I don't think for the most part Khabib was, like I said, fazed by it. But let's not forget last year when he was fighting Floyd Mayweather, the press conference in Brooklyn. Everyone's like, he crossed the line, he crossed the line. He was walking around with the Golden State Warriors C.J. Watson jersey that went over most people's heads, but that was in reference to Floyd Mayweather's domestic violence allegations. So, or I should say accusations. So, Conor is not afraid to go to places that other people are afraid to go. And we saw that very, very early on in this whole process when he started talking about on social media Khabib's father and Chechnya and Dagestan. He's just not afraid. And, that's part of why people love him. He is going to say things about his opponents that people wouldn't dream even thinking. And we're seeing that now with this fight, and we saw it on display at that press conference.
Yeah, like the one thing that we can quite confidently say that's changed is Conor McGregor and his relationship with the UFC, and obviously everybody knows about proper whiskey now as a result of what happened in New York last Thursday night. This is a really unique development in world sport and in the history of sport. It's not just in the fight game. This is something that we haven't seen too often, and this is, I don't want to say a concession, but this is certainly quite the allowance from Dana White for proper whiskey to come on as a partner of this big fight.
Well, Dana understands who the big dog is here, and, you just see their demeanor. I mean, to me, that wasn't really the biggest sort of takeaway of that evolving relationship. I don't know if you saw when they squared off, and there's a camera angle from Dana's point of view of them facing off, and they're sort of talking to each other, and Conor's whispering to him, "You're dead, you're dead." And then all of a sudden, once they're turning towards the crowd, Dana, looks off to the side and says to someone, "Get Conor's belt." The same two belts that they stripped him of. And he's like, "Don't worry, they're coming." I mean, that just says it all. That tells you who's the real big dog here. That tells you who's running the show. Conor has had a lot of power for a lot of time. And I don't think that, the whiskey sponsorship is an indication of, some sort of evolving relationship. People were saying, "Oh, how could they let him box?" And that was another indication. Of course, the UFC made a lot of money off of that as well. And how could they let him fight for the lightweight title after never defending the featherweight title? Another indication of his power. How could they let him fight Nate Diaz at 170 after he just lost that fight? Another indication of his power. So this has been, escalating. And you know what? The UFC is right for making concessions for Conor McGregor. He deserves it. He makes them more money than anyone.
Yeah. Well, what do you think the end game is in the mind of the commercial thinking Conor McGregor here in terms of this partnership? Where does he want to end up in terms of his partnership with the UFC?
I think he wants to get paid. I think he wants to have fights that make a lot of sense for him. A lot was made of this new 6-fight contract that he signed. He had 4 fights left on his other deal. So really the real story is the extra 2. But as you may know, contracts in mixed martial arts and in the UFC in particular are not like, I'll equate them to something I know about the NBA or Major League Baseball. At any point, the UFC can cut Conor, especially after a loss, or if he, acts a fool, but they're not going to do that. He's the biggest star in the history of the sport. So what is this? He'll renegotiate after this fight. He'll renegotiate after the next fight, It doesn't really mean anything. So I think that was more PR just to say, like, oh, we got him. He's going to be with us for long term. But Conor, in my opinion, maybe outside of Floyd, who's kind of in, who's kind of out, is the most powerful man in combat sports because he's able to, get these concessions, because he's able to march to the beat of his own drum, because he's able to, be out for a while and still be, considered a champion. And that's a credit to him. No one, a lot of people like to say that, oh, the UFC, they bend it backwards for Conor McGregor and they made Conor McGregor. I don't subscribe to that. I think Conor McGregor made Conor McGregor, and then the UFC, a light went off and they were like, wow, we need to attach ourselves to this guy. But he deserves, in my opinion, the boatload of the credit for everything that is happening to him. Yeah,
it's an interesting point, and I guess, like I said earlier on, that maybe concession isn't the right word, because ultimately the UFC are looking at this and they're like, well, if that makes Conor McGregor happy and he's happy to be in bed with us in the UFC, then we're happy to have this guy with us and we're happy to go on this journey together at this point. It makes commercial sense from Dana White's perspective as well, no?
Absolutely. I mean, okay, so we're going to do a deal to have this whiskey brand on the mat. Okay, great. That or no Conor. I mean, like... Yeah. The amount of money that he generates for them, the amount of interest, the amount of buzz, hype, headlines. I mean, there's no one right now that even comes close to him. That's on his level. The only person at the time 2 years ago, when we were last seen actively fighting, he fought at UFC 205. Ronda returned at UFC 207, and she hasn't returned since. She was the only person who was on his level, and I would argue at that point Conor had surpassed her after what he did at Madison Square Garden. So that's just the nature of life. The biggest stars are going to get certain things that other people aren't, the most popular people, etc. And, witness what happened in April. If that was just a mid-tier fighter, of course they wouldn't still be on the roster. But I don't think I'm breaking news when I say that people who are at his level in any walk of life, whether it's business, your office, whatever, there are certain people who are going to be treated a different way because of what they bring to the table. And in our sport, Conor is the creme de la creme.
Ariel, is this going to be the toughest fight of Conor McGregor's mixed martial arts career?
Stylistically, yes. There's obviously a lot at play here because of Khabib's grappling, his wrestling, his cardio. He's able to go 25 minutes. He doesn't appear to get tired. He has incredible takedowns, credible wrestling. He's never lost a round. He's never lost a fight. On paper, everything says that this should be the toughest fight of Conor McGregor's career. Plus, you add to that, Conor hasn't fought in almost 2 years. A lot's been going on in his life. How seriously has he been training? There's a lot of question marks there, right? But conversely, this is the biggest fight of Khabib's career as well. He's never fought a striker like Conor McGregor. He's never fought a talent like Conor McGregor as well. So for both men, what I like about this so much is that it's both of their biggest fights ever, and it's both of their toughest fights ever. And so you can't really tip the scales in one person's favor because they're both, it's the classic grappler versus striker matchup. Every fight starts standing. At some point, it goes to the ground. Who's going to win out? It's a fascinating chess game.
Yeah, you speak to a lot of people who've been in training camps with both of these guys. Is there any sense at all that Conor McGregor's ground game has got any better over the years since, this hiatus from the UFC?
They continue to say that, even people that he trains with, the likes of Dylan Dennis, have told me that they think that he could out-grapple Khabib. And, of course, they're going to back their guy. They're going to be confident about their guy. That's not exactly breaking news per se, but you putting that out there, that's a pretty bold statement. There's no doubt about it. And look, I don't think that Conor is taking this lightly at all. He knows what's at stake here. He knows there's a lot of people who don't think that he can hang with Khabib, and he also knows what's at stake. He could be the guy to give him his first loss, 26-1, and the one is Conor. I mean, that's just another feather in his cap. So I don't foresee that he's taking him lightly, and it's such a hard. I mean, the betting odds are super tight. It's such a hard fight to predict, but I love the fact that you know exactly what both men want to do, right? We know that Conor would like to keep this standing. We know that ideally Khabib wants to keep it on the ground. Who's going to win out?
Yeah, who do you think is going to win?
I knew you were going to ask me that the moment I started talking about predicting. But I shall abstain, my friend. You know why? Because in this game, a lot of people get sensitive. They get a little bit riled up when you make a prediction. They say, oh, now you picked against me. So I've learned over the years that the juice isn't necessarily worth the squeeze on that one. So, I mean, who am I to predict the fight? You're not going to get me to break my rule today. So I'm sorry about that. I'll just leave it at that.
No problem at all. I think you managed to illuminate enough for us, and we can make our own decision. Ariel, great to chat up. How are the new digs over at ESPN treating you?
Yeah, not bad. I appreciate it. It's a lifelong dream to work there. Ever since I was a kid, before I even started dreaming of actually doing this for a living, I always thought, wow, what would it be like to work for ESPN, the worldwide leader in sports? So it's very cool, and it's great that I just started 3.5 months ago, and now here we are before arguably the biggest fight in UFC history. And then in January, they're going to be the home of the UFC here in the United States. So perhaps the stars are aligning for me on this one, and I'm very excited to be a part of it.
Well, the show is going great. Congratulations on everything, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate it.